Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about the Super Sentinel adventure. This one was sort of famous in my group of players because, in a lot of ways, this was a passing of the torch kind of a moment. Prior to this, my best friend had been the GM. We had graduated high school. He went off and joined the army. He couldn't run the game anymore. And this was the beginning of me becoming the game master. This was one of the very first adventures that I wrote. And I'm a huge fan of Transformers. So I was thinking of Unicron from Transformers, the movie. And for anyone who's not familiar, the whole concept with Unicron is he is a transformer so big he turns into a planet, right? And at the end of the movie, he finally transforms out of his planet mode. You just see this gigantic guy, and a lot of the transformers that are considered tough are just like ants to this guy fighting him. And so that's kind of what I was shooting for. And we had done probably at this point more adventures with Sentinels than anything else. My group of friends, if we would go to the movies on Friday night and afterwards we'd go back to Jay's house and maybe we would just want to play a game to pass the time and he had nothing prepared, we would ask for Sentinels. And our characters were all thought to be mutants back then, so having Sentinels detect us and show up was commonplace, right? So I thought this adventure was going to seem like the culmination of all of that, right? And in my mind, we had fought all of these very normal sentinels. What if we had to fight the sentinel that was somehow bigger and badder than anything we dealt with before? And so we came up with this idea that Necron, who is kind of our big bad guy at this point in the campaign, thanks to Zero Hour, and this is a retcon, by the way, I didn't say it at the time. At the time, we said Necron had this orb of circuitry, and it was sort of mysterious. Nobody knew where it came from. And so he installed it into like a normal sentinel and it assimilated it and it grew. And again, I was kind of thinking of Transformers because there's this moment, Transformers the movie, where a character named Hot Rod gets this MacGuffin called the Matrix of Leadership. And when he installs it in his chest, it physically makes him larger, right? So that's kind of what I had in the back of my head. And so I was like, well, this orb thing in our version is evil. They put it into the robot and the robot gets huge, you know? Or maybe something more people would be familiar with, I don't know, would be in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles stuff. There was a moment where the Shredder was exposed to mutagen and he became the Super Shredder. And he was just a bigger, stronger version of what he had been before, right? So that's what we were doing was the idea of doing this to a Sentinel and having a Super Sentinel. And so, in terms of plot, there really was none. It was my first outing as a GM. So, the Super Sentinel is just walking through the countryside between cities. And he is heading towards the city where the heroes spend the majority of their time. He has not yet reached it. And so, one of the things I came up with was this threat that the technology that had made this thing huge worked a lot like the Borg. And what I had come up with was this idea that if you knock him down in a field and the only stuff around him is like dirt and, whatever, grass and things like that, that the technology has nothing to work with there, right? But if he makes it all the way into town, that technology becomes dangerous and it's going to start assimilating everything it touches. So if he, touches a car, he assimilates the car and it becomes kind of a bigger, super version of what it was before. At any rate, and then the other part of it is I had given him a power from Marvel superheroes. I'm trying to remember what it's called now. Might be called something like communicate with machinery or something like that. The DC Hero system has a similar ability called interface. But my idea was he could bestow artificial intelligence to something like an assimilated car or an assimilated tank or whatever it happened to be, and then control it, right? So that it was a massive threat, you know? And so halfway between cities, basically, is where heroes start to fight it. And they're shooting it. And one of the big ideas was he had skin armor. And so you had to do a certain amount of damage. So, like, let's say he had 20 points of skin armor. If you did 25 points of damage, it means five of that made it through, and the skin armor stopped at the first 20. Right? Does that make sense? Um, so it was a whole lot of characters shooting this guy and trying different things. And, like 9/10 of what they were trying was not working. And then that 1/10 of stuff, when they would do enough damage to start whittling its hit points down, that was getting the players into it. They would kind of cheer and stuff like that. I was new at being a GM though, so I messed up basically how much of a threat he was, right? So it turns out he makes it to the city, which I did not want to happen, but it was just how it went. So he makes it to the city, and then they destroy him. And it was a friend of mine from high school who was kind of there, to kind of sort of witness the passing of the torch, no pun intended, because he was playing a character named Torch. His name was Ryan Miller. Um, Ryan kind of gets in the kill shot, and Ryan liked dirty jokes and stuff like that. So the idea is they've been shooting the back of the robot's knees, so its knees buckle. It falls forward, and this is in town. It basically falls onto a grocery store. And this was like the middle of the night. There's nobody there or anything, so nobody dies. And it's like pushing itself up, right? And its legs are not working right now. So like its chest is high up. And we compared it to like almost like a sphinx kind of a pose. And so it starts to assimilate the grocery store for all the good it did. I don't know what a more evil super version of grocery store even looks like, but its circuitry is spreading through the walls of this thing and so on and so forth. And at any rate, um, Ryan had ran around behind it and he had this gadget that he invented that he could shoot fireballs and stuff like that. But while he was wearing this gauntlet on his hand, he could make a spear out of fire and he could charge it so that every round the spear did more and more and more and more damage. And so finally, Ryan throws it at this thing's butt. He's basically trying to get it up the butt if he can. And it hits and it explodes and it just destroys this utterly and completely destroys the pelvis of this robot. But then the problem is there's sort of like robot butt shrapnel flying everywhere. And everywhere a chunk of that hits, it starts to assimilate. So if it goes across the street and lands in your living room and is embedded in your TV set, it starts to assimilate the TV set. You know what I mean? Um, so this is getting to be a problem really, really fast. And what ends up happening then is Ryan's character Torch was a gadgeteer. So we go inside of the robot, which again is a throwback to Unicron because in Transformers the movie they actually are running around inside of Unicron, and there's a room with a bunch of like computer monitors and stuff like that. So they find a very similar thing inside the anatomy of this construct, right? And so Ryan um, rolls some dice using his science skills to get this all shut down, and he actually does, but not before it assimilates the town. So it was interesting. I wasn't really trying to do this, but it becomes symbolic of kind of that passing of the torch was in Jay's era, you know, the town was called Mansfield. And then after this happened, we called it New Mansfield, which was kind of a nod to anime with like Neo Tokyo. You know what I mean? That's what we were shooting for. And then that's what the town ends up looking like. It's all of a sudden this entire town is assimilated. And I mentioned earlier a retcon. At the time, I was just making this all up as I went, of course, but around Y2K, DC did a story, and I believe it was called Superman Y2K. And in it, Brainiac 13 comes back in time from the future and he assimilates Metropolis. And it just so happens it was exactly what I had done, right? They were like perfect fits for each other. So the retcon was we said that during Zero Hour, which was a recent event involving time travel, some of those characters had interacted with that 21st century metropolis that had been assimilated. And so that's where this mystery orb thing had come from, right? So so what happens to what was the town where all of our high school adventures took place is the exact same thing that happened in those Superman comics. So if you take an idea like say a train, uh it now is like wider. It has like really wide tracks and it's maybe a two-story tall massive train, you know. In the comics would refer to one of those as a rail whale. But yeah, we just souped everything up. We made everything sort of bigger, exaggerated versions of whatever it already was. And then when Ryan was, rolling dice to use his science skills, what he was really doing was sort of turning off the evil AI that would control this stuff so that instead, you might have a super version of a car, but it's just a car. It's not going to turn on you and, so on and so forth. Um, but yeah, that was it. Like that was the whole adventure. And then in the months to come, we used this as an excuse to bring in more and more companies. So, for instance, Wayne Enterprises from the Batman comics, they show up in New Mansfield because they're wanting to study these circuits that have just kind of appeared overnight. Um, LexCorp now has a presence. Tony Stark now has a presence. We brought in Wildcats. I think the guy that ran Wildcats was named Jacob Marlowe, and I think his company was called Halo. They now are here. And so we start to see what had been not a very big town at all is just growing by leaps and bounds, and it's getting skyscrapers are being built, and it's becoming a bigger deal than it had been previously. But yeah, this is where all of that started. And this kind of set the pace then for the next uh, era of the game. But that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. If so, as always, smash that like button, leave us a comment, and make sure you're still subscribed. And from all of us here at the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.